Today on Market Journal, being Nebraska strong also means taking care of yourself after a disaster like the recent floods. We'll tell you some ways to cope in times of tragedy. USDA's annual prospective plantings report has been released. Learn what acreage changes could be in store. Is your current calving season the right one for your operation? Here are the 3 factors you need to take into account when choosing what's best. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could join us for our first show of April. The year is flying by for sure. And beginning our show, according to last month's USDA Farm Sector Income Forecast, net farm income for this year is projected to rise 10% from 2018. Of course, with the flooding impacting fields in Nebraska and surrounding states, ongoing trade negotiations, and more, those projections can easily change. All that to say, if you can find a way to save a buck here and there, you'd be wise to do so. Nebraska Extension educator Robert Tigner joined me to talk about some of his favorite ways to stretch your cash flow on the farm. One thing you talk about, cancel or renegotiate leases that are unprofitable. How does one decide which decision is best on that front?
Well, some of that has to do with communication with their current landowners. The tenant needs to understand their landowner well and have a good communication avenue with that landowner. If there's a farmer that has just recently retired and is renting that land to a new tenant, they probably have a good understanding that there's a lot of risk in today's agricultural environment. But if there's 2 or 3 generations removed from that operation of that land, it's more difficult for those tenants to communicate well with the landowners. They have to have real good communication with their landowner, though, to figure out which one is the better process. If they haven't canceled that cash rental agreement or that rental agreement by the 1st of September, they are locked in unless the landowner is going to allow them to renegotiate.
And you also mentioned defer capital asset purchases. What are some things to consider there?
Well, some of those things to consider is which is going to be more cash conserving for them. Sometimes it is more cash conserving to actually buy a new machine or a used machine or have it rented from an operation or have custom operations done for them than to own their current machinery line. Sometimes it's more useful to get rid of those repair costs and be able to use newer equipment, newer machinery. But you have to know what each cost is for both of those operations. If you don't know what those are, you must figure that out.
Okay, so another thing you mentioned, utilize FSA guaranteed loans. So how do you get those loans and where would someone learn more about that?
Well, that's the Farm Service Agency. So the first place to go is to set up an appointment and visit with the loan officers at your nearest FSA office. Sometimes those might be a ways away, but you'll always be able to contact them. Those guaranteed loans allow the lender, your current lender, financial lender, to lend you funds at less risk. That's what the guarantee is all about. It's similar to an FHA loan, Farmers Home Administration loan for homeowners loans and things like that.
And they have the low interest marketing loans too, right?
Yeah, one thing to really consider and hasn't been done by a lot of farmers recently is whether or not to put their owned or their their stored grain under loan, a CCC or a conservation loan that would give them still access to gaining appreciation in that grain price, as well as cash to pay off operating notes or to pay off costs for inputs that they will have for this year.
And you also mentioned sometimes it's best to sell assets that aren't earning their keep. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Yes, when I was farming, it's those extra tractors that you have sitting around that you really never use, but you kind of like to have them around just in case. You know, maybe they're a collector item or whatever, something like that. Or maybe it's that spare combine, those, or you have machinery left over from switching from conventional till to strip till. That extra machinery needs to be sold someplace so that it no longer becomes an asset sink for you.
And are there any other tips that we didn't specifically talk about but that you'd still like to mention?
Well, one thing that really needs to be considered by farm families is to develop a family living budget. That budget is extremely important to stick to because it's easy for us to spend money on things that maybe are not in the budget. If we stick to the budget, we will have better control of our cash flow. The same can be said for the farm operation itself. Develop a projected cash flow and stick to that budget and track how well you are doing with sticking to that cash flow document that you've prepared. It helps you plan rather than react to situations.
Thanks to Robert for those tips. Moving on, and most farmers will agree that their job is rewarding, but also very stressful. And that stress is only compounded by the things you can't control, as we've seen with the recent flooding throughout the state. And experts say that while you're working on getting your fields in order, you must do the same for your mental health too. As farms across Nebraska rebuild from the devastating flooding of 2019, our TVs are inundated with images that can make you feel sick to your stomach. But it's the unseen, the anxiety and hopelessness going on in a farmer's head that can linger long after the water is gone. Rural Health, Wellness, and Safety Extension educator Susan Harris-Broomfield says there are various stages flooding victims and response teams will encounter.
First of all, there is the heroic stage where everyone's coming together, everyone's bringing items to help the victims of the floods, and it's just like a busy anthill. You know, everything's working, it's great. And so then it becomes the honeymoon stage where everybody's kind of hopeful and things are going well. But then what creeps in is the disillusionment.
That stage, Susan says, is one of the most important when working with victims of a disaster. And it's at this time when more serious issues can take hold.
After a few months, everybody goes home, the victims are left to finish their cleanup, and things aren't quite as bright as they used to be. There could be substance use problems, there could be depression setting in. That is the time that we really need to work with the people who are the victims of the flood.
Besides taking stock of your own mental health, it's also important to notice any changes in your children after a traumatic event.
I think it's important to watch them in the first weeks and months after the flooding. Watch their behavior. Mostly with kids, that's where it's going to happen. Emotions are going to be different, their sleep habits maybe. Just try to keep a routine. That's what kids need, is a routine.
During tough times, experts stress the need for support systems and having a positive attitude.
When you're out of control in a situation like this, you just need to accept it, embrace it, and work for a solution. I know it sounds difficult, but it sure is a lot more productive than focusing on the problem. And also just your mental health, your physical health. Keep eating regular food. Sleep. I know it's hard at this time, but it's just so crucial. Try to put your worries aside at the end of the evening, get some sleep. Social networks is really important in this. Just talking to friends, even professionals. We think we can do it all ourselves, but we can't always do it ourselves.
For more resources about flood recovery, contact your local extension office or head over to flood.unl.edu. It's time for this week's trivia question. And with Easter coming up in a couple weeks, we've got a question about eggs. Not Easter eggs, but the regular ones. Here's the question. Which country is the largest egg producer in the world? Is the answer the United States, Australia, Canada, or is it China? Make your guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. Time for markets now, and USDA's annual forecast for spring planting was released. We'll check out some of the highlights. Trade negotiations, they're continuing with China. And we always hear how soybeans are the big loser in trade talks, but our analyst this week says wheat can be impacted too. We'll get his thoughts right now. We're joined now by Dr. Frayne Olson for this week's market report. He's with North Dakota State University Extension, serving as a crops economist and marketing specialist. Frayne, thanks for being here this week.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
And the big story we're covering on Market Journal the last couple weeks has been the terrible flooding. So if you could give us a sense of what it's been like for farmers in North Dakota, where you are.
Well, actually, we're a little bit behind you guys. One of the reasons you've had such issues, of course, is not only the snowpack, but the warmer weather and the rain showers. And fortunately, from our end, we've been missing most of that. So the spring melt that we've had so far has been almost ideal. We've had daytime temperatures in the upper 30s, lower 40s. We've had nighttime temperatures in the 20s. So it's been basically ideal. We get melting during the day, it cools down and freezes again at night. So the snow melt so far has been very, very almost ideal. We are still looking at some flooding conditions, especially in the eastern portion of the state. But the forecast for the flood levels are coming downwards now. So it looks like it's going to be a much easier spring than we had first anticipated.
And USDA released its annual forecast for spring planting season at the end of March. I guess my first question would have to be, given the flooding, can we even rely on this report to be very accurate?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, I'm getting a lot of those kinds of questions from farmers here in North Dakota as well. So the survey was taken in the first part of March. We just got the report from that. Obviously, the survey was taken long before we knew of the flooding and the issues that we're facing right now. Although I do think a lot of farmers did realize, especially in your area as well as we get into central Iowa, that the soil conditions were very, very wet. We had a tough time getting the crop out of the field. I think there was some expectation we may have some planting delays. Obviously, flooding has complicated that. So I do know the market is trying to adjust for that, saying, anticipate, well, what does this all mean? Are we going to have some planting delays? If we do have planting delays, does that mean that we're going to slightly cut back on corn acres and increase soybean acres, or are we simply going to shift varieties of corn and look at some shorter season choices rather than the longer season varieties? So still a lot of questions. I think a lot of that will depend heavily on the spring weather. Planting conditions, we're going to be watching the planting progress numbers very, very closely as we move through the spring's work and trying to get a better read on how do we adjust those planted acreage expectations.
Gotcha. And Frayne, before the flooding, lots of folks were getting their marketing plan, risk management plans in order. What's the biggest way the flooding has changed these plans?
Well, okay, so I think there's a couple pieces to that. First, of course, for those that have had some flooding, the issue is, are we going to have some bins that are starting to show some stress because of the higher water levels? The other issue, of course, is transportation and logistics, being able to get it from the farm into town. And that's not only just the roads, but it's also the railroads. I know there have been some rail bridges that have gone out. So logistics are getting to be a real big issue. Even flooding on the Missouri and the Mississippi River are causing some issues for the barge traffic. Now, hopefully those are all temporary, that over time we'll get those repaired and fixed and that things will settle down and become more normal again. But I do think the timing of this is going to be important. Obviously, again, with the planting intentions report or prospective plantings report, we got the bigger shift into corn caused corn prices to decrease, which I think is now adjusting some farmers' expectations on what's a good pricing level to be able to sell some more corn. I do anticipate as we move into spring's work that we will get some volatility back into the marketplace. We're going to be watching, again, planting progress reports very, very closely. I do think there's going to be some opportunities to be able to get some higher levels. However, they're not going to last very long. These are going to be very, very short-lived, and so please be ready and take advantage of those when they occur. And obviously the other thing kind of sitting in the background right now is all the trade and the trade negotiations going on. Are we going to get a deal? When will that deal become signed? And then also, what are the longer term implications?
Yeah, and sticking with trade, a lot of times we focus on the soybean market with that, but I've read that you've said that wheat could also be impacted here. Why is that?
Well, okay, so, and I'm going to talk specifically now about the negotiations going on with China. One of the things that China has promised to do as part of this agreement, once it's been signed, is that they will start purchasing larger quantities of U.S. agricultural products. And usually people jump to the conclusion that means soybeans. But if you listen to the statements coming out of China, it's actually a broad base of commodities. Soybeans is included in that, but corn and DDGs and ethanol and wheat, as well as livestock products like pork, potentially some beef, are also on the list. So I think as we get an agreement, the Chinese start to come in and start purchasing some of these agricultural products, we will see an additional lift into the general market prices we see. May not be a big sharp rally, but I do think we'll see some support with some upward movement. Now, from the wheat standpoint, China is the world's largest producer of wheat. When you look at total wheat production, they're very large consumers of wheat. Typically, they have not purchased a lot of wheat off the world market, but there is an interest in buying some U.S. wheat as well. And so we start adding some wheat sales into the Chinese mix, and all of a sudden that can make a pretty large difference in our ending stocks of the wheat.
Gotcha. Frayne Olson, North Dakota State University, we appreciate your insight. Always good to talk to you. We'll do it again soon.
All right, I would really enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Chad Hart. He's an agricultural economist from Iowa State University. So if you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Moving on, and multi-hybrid planters have garnered a lot of attention in the last several years, but often cost about $30,000 more than a conventional planter of the same size. In 2017, Central Valley Ag kicked off a series of research trials to evaluate ways to optimize the return on investment from multi-hybrid planter technology. CVA used a lower cost approach with a 1992 John Deere 7200 6-row planter retrofitted with precision planting V-set select units. And this winter, CVA revamped another 7000 series planter, although this one is an 8-row and with a few extra features. Read about this planter rebuild in the April Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, we saw some rain in some spots earlier this week. Conditions have been pretty mild though. How's the week ahead shaping up?
Well, Troy, we did have some precip the last week, and we had some nice temperatures also during this past week. The main precipitation events were last Friday through Saturday morning, and most of the area that was impacted was from northwest through southeast Nebraska. Missed a substantial portion of northern half of east central and northeastern Nebraska with the midweek storm that came through. Did drop some decent precipitation in those areas that missed out on the first event. So we had anywhere from a quarter inch to upwards of an inch across northern half of east central and northeast Nebraska, lesser totals as you headed southward. And now we have this storm system that's moving through the region that's primarily going to impact a significant portion of eastern Nebraska with lesser impacts in western Nebraska. So let's take a look at the upper air model. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is this weak little wave that is beginning to move through our region. In the upper atmosphere that will strengthen as it moves toward the east. Surface low over the Texas Panhandle. Of course, we get a good feed of moisture toward the north, but we are seeing some scattered effluence of where the precipitation itself will basically form out. And most of the idea is in Texas, and lighter amounts will move to the north. And then as we get further toward the east tomorrow, this system strengthens and we really start to see some surge of moisture up into the central and eastern corn belt with surface low down in Mississippi. That's really going to feed the moisture up. We'll have a scattering across eastern Nebraska, but not a washout. And then we start to see the ridging pattern build in for Sunday, and that is actually going to push the precipitation to the east of us. We'll have low pressure system basically sitting to our west, but we do not have any moisture to feed into this system as it's going to remain to the east, so this will be a dry frontal passage. And more importantly, as we get to the early part of the week, we start to see that ridge building in. Trough to the southwest is going to start to push moisture toward our region. The surface low looks like it's going to try to develop in the Texas Panhandle, but it looks like we're going to be fairly dry, at least for the substantial portion of Monday, as the main precipitation bands over the central Rockies. That will start to move out as we get into the day on Tuesday. A very strong storm system looks like it's going to form. Big moisture surge, low pressure, tight gradient. We're going to have a lot of wind with this and probably some significant moisture. Right now, the models are indicating that South Dakota and northern Nebraska is a periphery of the heavy precipitation, and then as that trough moves to the east during the midweek period, we'll start to see that precipitation form over eastern Nebraska as a surface low now is over Ohio. Wraparound moisture will really impact portions of eastern Nebraska, and it is also showing accumulating snowfall. So pay attention to this. This could change radically over the next few days. And that system slides off as we go toward the end of next week. High pressure starts to be firmly in control, so we would expect drier conditions. But overall, temperatures should be fairly benign as the main precipitation band moves into the northeastern United States and the eastern Corn Belt. So as we look further into the future, we're basically looking at 8 to 10 to 14 day forecast below normal temperatures, and in terms of precipitation above normal. I think that the below normal precipitation is primarily the result of excessive cloudiness and several more storm systems that are on the way into our region. So Troy, overall, a little scattering of warmth, a little bit of precipitation, just about everything you would expect for spring conditions.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, which country is the largest egg producer in the world? The answer is D, China. So excellent job if you got it right. Their chickens lay about 160 billion eggs per year. For our final story today, we've got Nebraska Extension's Dr. Matt Stockton back on the show to give all the cattle producers out there some info on calving. He says it may be worth it to do your research and see if your current calving season is the best one for your operation.
If you change calving seasons, you may change some of those restrictions or requirements, and it may make it easier, you can simply more manage better or do things better that might be more efficient for you. So that's why you would consider a change in calving season, because to change calving season just to change calving season, that doesn't make any sense. There needs to be a reason. It could be economic, it could be labor related, it could be, there's a lot of reasons for it, but it should be something that should be done thoughtfully and carefully, because anytime you go into a different system that you're not familiar with, there's potential for things that you hadn't thought of or pitfalls of things that could happen.
Yeah, and you've talked about three main things to consider if you're thinking about switching, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, okay, so how does it change productivity? So how does productivity change? Then also, related to that productivity, what does it change as far as the cost structure related to that? So in other words, if you change your calving season, maybe you're changing when cattle nutrition, which could then change what you have to supplement or not supplement, which could change also then maybe reproductive rates. And then also, then you got this marketing issue that the cost of buying or selling animals at a different time of the year at a different size, you're going to have a different market effect. So those things are, you get that cost of production and the marketing, you put them all together, and it kind of gives you this idea of maybe whether you should do it or not do it. And that's kind of what we talk about in the article. We give an example where we do May versus the March calving type, and there's some discussion because there is different reproductive rates and there's different things that really change the way things are. So that's what we were trying to bring out, so that any person who's considering doing a change should consider what that would do to them or how they could handle those particular things.
I want to dive into the economics a little bit, and you helped develop the Nebraska Calving Systems Model. Talk a little bit about what the NCSM is.
Okay, it's a giant spreadsheet.
Okay.
Okay, it's a giant Excel spreadsheet. It started out as a simple little spreadsheet when I first started doing some of this work about 10 years ago, whatever, and we were doing a comparison between the March and June calving at the time for the Gudman Hills Ranch. And so what we did, we just started expanding it, because what's happened is we realized that the more detailed we could get about the cost, the more we could measure where those costs were coming from or where those problems were in the business. So we built this giant spreadsheet, and also we try to keep it up to date so that it has all the current costs and all the current values, because you got pasture, you got all corn stock grazing, all these different things you can put in it, and then you got reproductive rates, and you got calf size. The size of the calf, the time of weaning, when they're weaned, when they're sold, those kinds of things. All that's got to be considered and accounted for, so it becomes this giant spreadsheet.
And you talked about some examples just a second ago. Go into a little more depth on that. I know you were talking about there's March and May data. Any other figures that you'd like to discuss?
Well, the thing is, there is that data. There are some older articles where we talk about March versus June, and some people backed off the June. There's some fall calving information where August calving was brought in. There is some research now that's showing that it's going to cost you a little bit more to go to these other systems because your cow isn't copying the cycle of the natural pasture or range, where it grows at a certain time and it peaks at a certain time, and your cow nutrition also, because of lactation and because of the way they calve, can peak at different times too. And so when you get those offsets, sometimes it can affect other productive things in your thing, and we're finding that to be true in some of the physical data, but then that's reflected in the economic model that we put this all together in.
And what are some of the main takeaways from this study that you'd like producers to come away with?
Well, I would like to simply say, don't just change because it sounds like, hey, it's a better time of year to calve. I don't really like the cold. I mean, if that may be a good reason if you really don't like the cold and it's really that hard on you. But there are some economic considerations that you should consider. Like we found that the May calves had smaller calves. Okay, we found that they had cheaper nutritional requirements, but then that also resulted in lower productive rates as far as reproduction, as far as pregnancy rates. And then also the replacement costs were greater because here you're replacing the animal in the spring rather than the fall when cattle prices are probably at their lowest. So there's some different things there that create some cost and price and differences. And it turns out that while you can graze them cheaper because of the way you feed and use the corn stalk residue and all that stuff, it ends up costing you more because of the replacement costs and that sort of thing. And then you don't gain as much, even though you have the price slide where you get a smaller value for a calf, because they're smaller, you don't get as much per head because the larger calf actually makes up for that. So there's some things, I mean, it's like I said, that's why we modeled it, because there's so many things going on that you got to think about. So when you do this, it's not just a simple, I'm just going to change time of year, everything's the same. It's not. Just remember, it's not the same, it's not going to be the same, and you are going to have some effects because you have that seasonality of prices, and then you also have the productivity differences and cow nutrition requirements happening at different times of the year.
And you'll want to be sure and check out the interview we did with Matt about cattle and the impacts flooding has had on them. That's on the Market Journal YouTube page. Well, we've reached the end of the show for this week. Next week, we'll be joined by market analyst Dr. Chad Hart. We'll bring you a story about calves and colostrum, and newly legalized industrial hemp could mean high profits for Nebraska. Should be a good show. Hope to see you right back here for it. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.